Live now. Hello. Welcome to Riffing with Ryan and our weekly feature, the weekly feature this week in Amplio with Guess Who? Not the Guess Who, the Guess Who is a band, but with Al Shalloway. Hello,
Hey
Al. Here we are. Sorry, folks, for being 3 minutes late. We had some coordination to do. Al, mentioning to me with a little bit of mystery that it was a big week in Amplio in the ACES community, and there's some things that you want to share. You want to give some context to it before we go into the
Yeah,
topics we talked about?
yeah. So Amplio is not your normal approach. It's not a framework. It's based on lean flow theory of constraints. Human-centered development takes the human part in. It's very much a collection, a synthesis of things I've learned in like 20 years or longer, but more the last 20 years because that's when I started looking to see what works, finding what other people. So it's an integration of a lot of ideas. And I've recently been really espousing the whole idea of using patterns. I've been in patterns for, I don't know, since 97 in the technical side. And I've been seeing more and more over the last few months how to explain it. I've been using them for decades too in process. But to be candid, I didn't feel comfortable putting it out that way for any number of reasons, but I have been. And this week was a real breakthrough in a couple of ways, because one thing that's always bothered me in the agile space is the lack of what I call verifiable theory. And by verifiable theory, I don't mean verified theory that somebody else proved and now you can use it, but that you yourself can verify. One of my kind of one-liners when I start an engagement, as I say, I'm going to present some stuff, assertions saying I have evidence that there's evidence for them, but I'm not going to give you the evidence. I want you to give me the evidence. And that way they get to prove what I'm saying is right or wrong. And then we can have a good conversation. I say, never trust a consultant. And by that, I mean, they can be, trust them to be good, trust them to try to do what they're trying to do with you, but don't trust that if they say something that it's true, you should be able to verify it on your own. And if they can't get you to do that, they don't understand it well enough. So what happened this week was two things that very exciting. Just continuing with the Amplio, what we call the Amplio Consultant Educators Program. Think of it as a 6-month mentoring program. And the ACOP, as I call another program that's free, Amplio Community Practice. One of these sessions was from there that I'm going to talk about. One of the sessions was from actually the ACE program itself. And the first one was putting together a reasonable explanation as to why this theory doesn't work well and why I believe most of the problems we have are due to this. And before I get into that, I want to tell one quick story. I may have told this before, but for any new listeners, either live or on the recording, there's something that people tend to ignore that there's a lot of evidence of. We're kind of in a scientific age and we seem to have explanations for everything nowadays. We don't really, but every generation thinks they've figured out, oh, we got it. We understand. That's not true. It's nice to observe that.
Kids today, kids.
Yeah, the kids today. Well, actually, it's more the adults too. So it goes all the way. You got to remember that I study history, not so much like what's that? If you don't learn the lessons of history, you'll repeat them. That's true. But there's an arrogance of groupthink that we always have it figured out. Like we understand. And I mean, this goes back for generations. So fact is, why are we the first one to understand? I remember making that insight when I was young adult. And I made that observation. Yeah, everybody thinks they're there and we think we're there. So this was like 52 years ago when I was 20. And I was like, no, we just think we are, but we're not. And that keeps you open to learning things. But anyway, this is an important thing that people forget, like maybe don't know, which is if you don't have an understandable theory, something that explains what's going on, people will ignore the evidence you have. So I'm going to take 2 minutes to tell a quick story because it's very germane to know this is true. This is how people are. And it goes back to the 19th century, 1847 in Austria. There was a doctor, Ignaz Semmelweis. He was the chief physician running two hospitals. They were both maternity hospitals. One was a maternity hospital for people who could afford it, and the other one was a maternity hospital for people who couldn't afford it. And in the one that people could afford it, it was a teaching hospital. So he taught young doctors, how to be better doctors and things like that. What was interesting is the hospital where you had the richer people basically had an 18% mortality rate, maternity mortality rate. These were maternity hospitals. And the other one had a very low rate, about 2% or something. And nobody could figure out why this was. In fact, people who had money tried to pretend they didn't so they could get into the kind of come off the street and come in and we'll help you birth your baby. So he started studying this and he started collecting data. And he noticed that there were times the maternity mortality rate at the teaching hospital, where paying for people come, dropped. That there were times it dropped, and he wondered, well, what's going on? And then he noticed those were days he was out of town. Now, if a detective had seen this, he might have thought you're a serial killer, but he knew he wasn't. He wasn't under drugs at night doing bad things. So he wondered, what was it? What was the correlation between him being out of town and the mortality rate dropping, or him being in town and the mortality rate being very high? And the only thing he could think of that was different is because the place where there was high mortality rate, I don't know where that came from, mortality rate, was that he was teaching doctors. And what happened when you teach doctors is that doctors would work on cadavers. Now, at this time, there was no germ theory. Pasteur hadn't come out with that. So he had no rationale for this. But he figured this high correlation, this must be it. This was the evidence. So he tried to figure out, how can I kind of disconnect these two? And the only thing he can think of is make it be as if they never had worked on the cadavers. So they had obviously washed the gore and junk off their hands, but he instituted a series of serious washing, took 15 minutes with lye and all that. The mortality rate immediately dropped down to 2%. Immediately. But he couldn't explain why. He could only explain the correlation. Now that's interesting, but what's more interesting is the doctors didn't want to do this because it took 15 minutes. They couldn't see as many patients. The hospital administrator didn't want them to do this because it took time. Just a segue, this is kind of like XP test first, if you ask me, but we won't go there. But so what happened is, it wasn't until Pasteur came out with his germ theory, this was after Ignaz Semmelweis had died, that they started recognizing this. So this idea that you just can go with empiricism, that you can just go with empirical data, is flawed. Human beings distrust things they can't understand. Ellie Goldratt says a comfort zone has less to do with control than it does to do with understanding or knowledge. He uses that word. So this is insidious because in the knowledge work area, in Agile in particular, there seems to be this dismissiveness. Oh, that's just theory. You hear this all the time. Oh, that's just theory. Oh, I don't believe in theory. Well, it's bullshit to not believe in it. What you want is verifiable theory. And I'll make a different distinction between verifiable theory and validatable theory. When I say verifiable, I mean you can verify it. There's a lot of good theory about management, theory X, theory Y, stuff like that. That's verifiable, and it is, but it's hard for an individual to do it. So when I talk about verifiable theory, I mean that the people who are learning it can actually verify it based on their own past experience and fully verify.
Independent verification.
A lot of management stuff, you can do that. So that's the basis. That's some of the theory based on evidence that I have. So that's the background. And then I got a couple things to talk about.
Ooh. Yeah. Wow. Again, the importance of not as in something as theoretical as in imaginary.
Yeah, not theoretical. Not like, I don't know what's going on. Let's try this. Let's make this maybe happen. No, I don't mean that.
Or
I'll give you an example.
Hypothetical. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mean hypothetical. And this is something what we've been doing. And this is a really solid resource for you to look at. In fact, maybe
you want to share your screen or
share my screen? Yeah, let me just get ready, because there's some resources I've been working on. So yeah, you can share my screen now.
It looks like your screen is our screen. You may need to change to a different tab there. Bring it in.
How do I bring it in? Oh, It thinks I'm sharing. It says stop screen share.
Yeah, stop that and then reshare it.
Okay.
And present the window you
Present.
want.
Share screen. Share screen. Okay. Is this, so I got to hit share. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So I'm just going to show you also where you can get some of the stuff, and then we'll get more into our conversation mode. So this is Success Engineering's homepage. And where we do these things are on this community practice. You can click that to go. It's free. But what I wanted to show you was actually when I talk about like verifiable theories, I also mean these things called first principles. I'm not going to go through this. I've shown you this before, but I wanted you to get an idea of what I'm talking about and that you could verify. And I just want to have it up here so I say it right. And here we go. And this is something that's actually available on the site as well. But here's an example. Multitasking causes delays in workflow, which causes waste. You know that. You're working on something, somebody comes in, interrupts you, causes you to multitask, something goes down. Maybe you now have to reset, but also you get, if you're wrong in what you're doing, you get the feedback later, and that means you keep going wrong later and people depending upon you. In fact, right here, number 2, they all relate to each other, as you can see. So when I talk about verifiable first principles, I mean, these are not just principles. Like in the Agile Manifesto, you have a lot of principles, but those aren't first principles. Principles are like the physics of flow. They're like things you can observe. And this being missing has been a real problem, and people ignore it, deny it, and certainly don't pay attention to it. And that's what I want. One of the things I want to talk about. The other one is hybrids. And these are interestingly enough related to each other, because hybrids have turned into a collection of practices when they should be based on a collection of what works. So anyway.
So which of those, again, regarding what happened in the community this week, and in the ACE sessions, and that, so did this happen? This, again, where did this topic come from? What was the conversation that was happening that led to this? And
well, one of the things we do in the ACE program is it's not just, and in the Amplio. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I knew there was something reason I pulled this up that I wanted to show you. But so here, let me share my screen again. Or do I just say present again? Or no, it's already
up. I'll bring it up when you want to share it.
Yeah, it's up there now. That's good. Yeah. So if you go to my website, because I want to show this. So this is one of the topics we've been working on for a couple of months right now. Is this? You go to resources and YouTube right there. And one of the playlists I've created to make it easier for people is this thing called Amplio Foundations. And these are the things I'm talking about: systems thinking, first principles, a whole bunch on value streams. They're shorter ones, so there are lots more factors for effective. And then how you can use patterns. We'd done this last week, and I think we talked about it last week.
Absolutely.
So Amplio has been based on this model of this theory, what's working, why it's working, and understanding of it. And one of the things I have seen in the Agile space is that if you look at LinkedIn, what's interesting about LinkedIn is that you see the same problems over and over again. You see the same discussions. You see the same lack of knowledge. You see the same people trying to fill in the gaps. And what you don't see is people stepping back and asking, why is this common confusion always present, no matter what people have been trained? And you see a lot of people explaining, oh, they never read the Scrum Guide. And that's just wrong, because I got data. That's an assertion with no data. It's a false assertion. So I actually did some surveys, because that hadn't been my experience. My experience is I went into places where they had CSMs, where they had people who read the Scrum Guide, where people were very frustrated. They couldn't get things sorted. And And it's easy to scoff off. It's interesting because the client's supposed to be right. We're supposed to attend to the client in Agile. And yet here the clients of Scrum are the people that are getting training, reading the manual. And yet we say, oh no, they're not doing it right. It's not our fault. And that's always bothered me because it's like, you got to get to why. And systems thinking is the first one, that the environment we're in. So it's funny, the more you talk about things, the better you can explain what they were. And what I noticed was this notion of empiricism only. Well, I knew it didn't work because I knew of Semmelweis's history.
Yeah.
And I know that when you don't have that, people are reluctant to believe it. Then it feels imposed. You're telling me to do this and I don't know why. Well, that's imposed. Well, expect resistance.
That may have been part of why at Semmelweis's time it wasn't happening, because his manner, his lack of understanding. It's like, you need to do this because it works.
Exactly.
When you ask why it works, well, no, don't worry about that. Just do it because this. And then the folks who's like, well, what? I'm curious. I want to know. And that may seem as if it is resistance, but it's really curiosity.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. And that if I don't think I can approach you with that curiosity, then whatever, I'm not going to do what he says because he doesn't respect me. So it's that duality of it.
Yeah, no, you're nailing it. It's all that stuff, which is interesting because that's how humans react. And if Agile is supposed to be about people, we should be attending to how they react to being told to do things. And most resistance is imposition. Margaret Wheatley, in her great book, A Simpler Way, which is both a personal book. In fact, I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, I read it because I needed a simpler way in my life. Saying, oh, that sounds good. It's going to tell me how to calm down and all that, And yeah, well, I do meditate too. I have all sorts of things. I'm kind of type A plus personality. But about halfway in, she starts talking about in business. It's actually, she's got a sense-making approach. That's where you try to figure out what's going on. Like in Evans, a sense-making thing, a weekend. Sutcliffe have sense-making. There are about a dozen different approaches on how to figure out what's going on. And about halfway in the book, it switches from personal to business. I mean, she was just talking about people at first and then how it showed up. And one of the things she says that's very astute is that people don't innately resist change. They resist imposition to change. So you have this huge conversation about how people resist change. And the fact is, let me tell you, you ever find somebody really suffering working with a tool they don't have, or a poor tool, and you walk over and say, here, use this shovel. Like if I'm digging in my garden, I've got this little hand shovel and my neighbor comes over. I'll give an example, actually. I was having troubles with some squirrels and who knows what else eating my bulbs.
Yeah.
And he's a great gardener. I'm a pretty good gardener, but this guy's really good. And he says, the problem is you got to put this matting over it because then it'll stop the animals from eating your bulbs, but the stuff can come through. I said, oh, thank you so much. I didn't resist that, So knowledge and understanding, because I knew why. It wasn't like, I'll just put this over. And I could see there were holes that the flowers could come up, but they were too small for the squirrels to dig through. So I could understand it. So yeah, great.
You could observe it. You could verify it for yourself. You had the knowledge and information. It wasn't just like, do this thing. I do this. So it works for me. So you don't have to.
Exactly.
And then oops, sorry, he splits.
What's interesting is my friend and I do gardening completely different from each other, but we learn from each other because we explain how we do things. And I mean, I know some things that he doesn't, but he knows more than I do. So it's a help, but it's a two-way street. So we can explain why, and we have some basis of it. But if you don't have that, see, when you do have that theory, you can adjust. You can make adjustments because if an adjustment's going to be good or not based on the verifiable theory. You don't have to run experiments as much. You don't have to follow to understand. You understand how it works differently. And this is why incomplete, being rather immutable, is even worse, because immutability is a kind of, you have to do it this way. Like you said, it's all the buttons you said, Ryan. It's disrespectful. I'm telling you, I know more because this is immutable. You got to do it all. When that's not really true. There's nothing in Scrum that you have to do the way they say. You do have to accomplish the intention of the Scrum practice. For like a daily Scrum, for example, you're creating opportunities to pivot, you're creating some collaboration of the team, you're making sure people understand how we're doing with the Scrum, with the sprint goal. But do you have to do it that way? No, just have to accomplish those things.
And I think this also gets down to, there are implied first principles in Scrum in terms of the pillars, right? It's transparency, inspection, adaptation.
Absolutely.
And all of the events, all of the artifacts, they all serve one or more of those three first principles, but they're not, it's not stated like that. And I think a lot of that gets pushed aside because I want to know how, I want to know the how to run the event. So I'm doing it by the rules, so I don't get smacked on the hand by the agile coach or my manager or whomever, or the agile transformation office that says I'm not doing the stand up right, as opposed to, as opposed to, again, what we're talking about in Amplio is something that's fit for purpose and it's based on verifiable theory.
Now, I want to say something about what you said about like transparency and that. So those aren't principles as much as guidance based on the principles. Okay, so like transparency, absolutely. Why? See, that's a what you do, but why?
Yeah.
Well, if you don't do it, not being able to see what's going on means you can't manage it. It means people can't collaborate to each other. So everything in Scrum you got roles, events, artifacts, rules, values, and these principles. They all lie on top of the first principles themselves, and they're good things, and there's a reason for them, but they don't work everywhere. And
and you're talking about learn to see. All right, that's the title of the book, isn't it? In the lean pantheon, it's Liker, right? I think it's the Liker.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting observation by Edgar Schein. He talks about, we don't talk and think about what we see. We see what we are able to think and talk about. And this is one of the problems with frameworks, by the way, which will be the second thing I talk about, which is frameworks. Their power to them. They kind of constrain what we look at, which is good. It's like it gives us a way to focus on some things, but it's still not quite the same. But let me finish this with a graphic. I'll show you in a second, or you can share my screen and I'll just make sure I put it up. Hang on, where's that? That's not, oh, maybe that was it. Oh no, here it is. Whoops, no, it just went away. Sorry, got the wrong one up. Just take a second. I know right where it is.
I think I
have so many slides. One of the things in the Amplio program, the ACE program, is we have, it's also, you get all the slides I use in it. And so I've got like 800 slides. So sometimes organizing it's a little difficult. But see, here's the thing. Where you start is very important. If you start with no verifiable theory, it becomes slower to learn because you can't pull in your own past experience. You've got to follow to understand. You got to do it for a while, create new experience. But when you have a theory, see, if you start with the physics of flow, you can understand up front because you can take advantage of your own latent knowledge. I'm kind of pointing this back. Actually, I wasn't going to do this with the animation, but ignore the blue stuff that shows up. But because it's easier they see there's Semmelweis always start. So no verifiable theory or start. What happens is you can't relate to your past. I'm going to skip the blue. Those are just the extra reasons. Slow to learn, take advantage of latent knowledge. Just look at the green and pink. That causes resistance. People don't like to do stuff they don't understand. Now, they don't mind it for a little while, but it's not a long-term thing. When you take advantage of your latent knowledge, you're motivated. Oh, that's cool. I understand that. It gives me confidence. You then can justify by saying, well, we're purposely incomplete. Got to deal with this. Instead of you can get a quick start. See, the other thing, this is the tie-in with patterns, which I'm not going over today. That was last week's session, and there is a video for that. When you have patterns, you can say, well, this is the default. In fact, think of it this way. Think of Scrum as a set of patterns. Now, they don't describe it this way, but there's something like, 15 roles, events, artifacts, and roles. Let's say each one of those, like what is a team? So they describe a team in Scrum. Well, there are other ways to have teams, but think of it as a pattern that's a solution to a recurring problem in a context, how you organize your people. And you can have multiple ways of doing it. So a cross-functional, self-managed, small, cross-functional, self-managed, autonomous team is one type of team. And that's one solution. So think of a pattern, but you've got a default. That's what the quick start with Amplio is about. It can give you a set of defaults that look like Scrum, or you can change things as you want. So you can get going quickly. When you don't have all this theory, when you're purposely incomplete, you got to reinvent things. That causes resistance. Why? Because there's more, there's nowhere, which we already had, but now we notice, oh, the quick start means I can get going quickly. There's less resistance. So we use patterns. I'm not going to go through this. This is the whole presentation, which is available online. I'll show you where to go.
But we have a question, I think, on that specific thing. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. Go ahead. Throw it in.
So what are your thoughts on start with a theory, and some point later it might become semi-verifiable theory?
Okay, so starting with theory is a problem because I love it, but a lot of people don't. See, that's the other weird thing. Some people do want to be told what to do, but when they have problems, they want to figure it out. So that's why I actually came up with a quick start, because with a quick start, you don't need the theory until somebody wonders why, and then you could explain it to them. So you can go both ways. When you have the theory and the practice, you can talk to people ahead of time. And sometimes people really want to know what's going on. Or maybe this is the distinction too. Let's say I'm a Scrum Master or I'm an Agile coach, because Scrum Master is you do Scrum, and maybe if you make some of these changes, you're not doing Scrum anymore. So say I'm an Agile coach who knows Scrum, an Agile coach who knows Kanban, an Agile coach who actually knows the physics of flow. And I talk to the team and I ask them, well, how do you guys want to get started? Tell me your problems. And they say, well, you know what? We want to validate everything you tell us. We don't want you to just tell us what to do. We want to be involved in the conversation. But we don't need to learn everything you know. You know a lot of stuff we don't know, but we want you to take advantage. They're talking to me. They want you to take advantage of what we know. See, this is now a nice collaborative endeavor. So what I suggest, if somebody wants to start quick, a team wants to start quick, is, and they've heard of Scrum, or they've done a little bit of Scrum, or they're doing Scrum, stick to those practices, but consider them to be the default starting point, except for two things. Should be doing sprints or one-day time boxing, because those change. And the other one is, do I have cross-functional teams or not? And then what do I do? So if they want to start quick, you can start with something based on the theory the Scrum Master or Agile coach knows, and use as a decision table to help them figure out, so they can see why a 2-week sprint or a one-day time boxing would be better, or a 4-week sprint, whatever. Now, sometimes people like to know, but the point is, what's interesting is it's not like you need everybody to know. It's like the coach as a guide. We had a session in Amplio community practice, coach as a guide. Maybe they're not telling people what to do, but they're guiding them in terms of learning. So anyway, why don't we pick back up?
You want to slide?
No.
I mean, again, the coach has the knowledge, and there's this idea that, okay, when you observe that they're struggling with the knowledge, you don't ask them, oh, you have the solution inside of you. No. And this kind of coach, the coach that we're talking about, delivering value with the team, is to say, I have this guidance, I have this knowledge, I will explain to you why this will apply. The patterns will solve this particular problem in this context, and then help them with that. So.
Well, actually, I'm going to segue into a third topic, because it also happened Friday.
Okay.
So we have like 6 sessions a week. Not everybody goes to all of them. In fact, very few go to all of them. But like the Monday morning session is what I call a working session, where people see, we co-create Amplio in a sense with the people in the ACE program. So Monday mornings, we had this co-creation, and then Monday afternoon, actually, I can't remember now what we did. It was so packed this week. I remember now. We did strategic pillars, agile budgeting, and what we call full kit allocation, where you allocate funds where you get the whole thing. But then Tuesday morning, we did what you see up there. But Thursday morning is another one of these presentation sections, and we talked about what is a coach. And we talked about these two extremes. One extreme is a coach, like a Scrum Master, as I always hear it rolled, is, well, you want them to figure it out, and you don't want to tell them, because then they're losing the opportunity to learn. So step back, just, make sure they do the Scrum practices and events and all that, and they'll figure it out. Okay, I don't like that. I've seen people struggle until they don't figure it out, and then they do something not good, not Scrum. The other approach is tell them everything, like safe. Here it is at all, and that's overwhelming.
Yeah.
So on one hand, you're simplistic. On the other hand, you're overwhelming. You want something in the middle. How do you get the right information at the right time to the right people based on their understanding at the same time? So this is the coach as a guide. You do this by asking questions. You do this by giving little insights. Maybe they don't know. We spend a lot of time in the workshop on how you build curriculum. How do you talk to people to take them from here to here to here to here to here to here? Not just take them here and say, follow till you understand or this works. But see, people can only learn what they already almost understand. And sometimes a question is all it takes to get them to go from here to there, to go from there to there. This is very consistent, by the way, with the Toyota Kata model, which is a Kaizen approach of learning and understanding intermix. So that's kind of what I mean. So yeah, so you can do this when you understand the difference between somebody, when you understand the difference between somebody like here who's an expert and somebody here who's not quite an expert yet. These people see the world differently, and these people don't. Remember Edgar Schein? We don't think and talk about what we see. We see what we are able to think and talk about. So when this person starts talking about the things this person's not seeing, oh, I see. You get these eureka insight moments. Oh, yeah, I kind of knew that, but I didn't understand it until now. See, people feel good with that. Whoa, look how smart I am. They may not say that, but they feel better than being told.
It's accomplishment, achievement, confidence, growing of skill. And that now with these new skills and this ability to see in a different way, that person is now able to address different challenges. So the challenge and skill match becomes, oh, now I can use these new skills that I'm building to solve challenges that are more challenging and reach that psychological flow state. So that and do that in group flow, which is, again, that's this is the point. How do you grow your skills so you can do
exactly
that we're talking
so
about?
You said it really, really nicely, because if people are learning and growing confidence, it gives motivation, it creates excitement. But when you're struggling, that causes frustration, resistance, lack of involvement. And when you look at what's going on in the agile space, you hear so many coaches complaining about people aren't involved, they're disengaged, they're frustrated, but they're not looking at why. And the reality is to look at why and to understand the why and then work on it does not take more time. See, it may take a little more time in that the coach has to learn this. Yeah, they got to learn a little more. There's no question. But think about when you start doing something and you don't understand, and the resistance, the having to reinvent the wheel, the frustration, that all slows you down.
Yeah.
So if you say, well, I'm going to have the coach guide us so we don't have that crap, then it never gets slowed down. They start, that's why we call it the Scrum Quick Start with Amplio, because they just go off running. Now, it may take a little more prep by the coach, but here's the good news. It doesn't take a lot more prep. And the reason it also takes calendar time might take less. And I say might because I'm using different methods. So I'm not sure I have data on this. I use a mentoring approach right now, but I can do a quick training. But is because the way we train is so inefficient. Block training like we do, most of the stuff just goes over your head. If you got a lot of slides to do, then you're just getting information. If you have a lot of games, the problem with games are great. In fact, Net Objectives, as far as I know, we were the first company to come up with a Scrum game. We did it so early, most people didn't even know we did it. And then we found it wasn't the best way to do it. So by the time we were getting out of games, because we've been doing it for a year or two, other people were coming into games. There are better ways based on just throw out the ways. I learned this from Alistair Coburn, this thing called synergy, where you set up real examples of things to work, but you have a structure within which they work so they get the insights. That's another side thing. But anyway, so show my screen again. I want to continue with this last little bit.
Let me pop it in there.
Okay.
Let me make it bigger.
Make it bigger. Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of where it was. And what we've got is, we've basically in this downward cycle, the no variable theory, and maybe you're not always going down, but it's getting harder and harder And whereas when you start with the physics of flow and people gain this confidence, it's an upward, you learn together. That's the other key thing. And there's another side benefit of this. Look at all the problems people are having on LinkedIn and all the solutions. 80% of the time, they're telling you how to run the framework better. Frameworks are not perfect. Frameworks are a model of thinking. What you want to do is learn how to focus on the work better. And this is a real issue. And this leads into the second thing. So if other people have questions, this would be a great time to
we do have one question that kind of came from the back here. I think the first question, I don't know if it exactly relates to this.
Okay. Oh, great. So this is not an easy thing to totally get. The question of both of our challenges are caused by the system. Okay. So in manufacturing, it might be easier to see, but it's actually shouldn't be that hard to see in the knowledge work. Imagine this. Imagine you're a developer and you have a testing. This is not a good thing, but just pretend it is. I mean, pretend this is the situation. You have a testing team.
Suspend your disbelief. Yes.
Yeah. Well, this is a reality. I mean, people have developers and they have testers. And one of the things I love about Scrum is it destroyed, or says to destroy that separation. You have developers, you have people who build, and some of them might write code and some of them might test, but those aren't their roles. Their roles are create value. It's one of the things I loved about Scrum when I first got introduced to it. It's a very brilliant idea. I mean, I was an XP guy before Scrum, so obviously I like integrating these. Okay, but let's say that you have developers, programmers, and you have testers. Now imagine those testers sit right next to you. And imagine that you all have a good rapport and you could work together. That's kind of what I mean by the system there. But now imagine they don't sit next to you. Imagine they're 12 hours away by time zone. You have a tougher problem now. Not your fault, not their fault. That's what I mean by the system you're embedded in.
Yeah.
Now, this doesn't get you off the hook.
Still got to get the work done. Still got to
get the work done. You're responsible for the system, even if it's causing the problems. So this is one of the reasons also theory is useful. Because if management doesn't understand this, if they don't know why you're having problems getting your code tested, don't expect anything from them. You can complain about them if you want. You can be a victim if you want. You can say it's not fair if you want, but it's still not going to help you. You got justification for your having troubles. This is where you need to take responsibility for them. So there are a couple ways to do that. Figure out how to work with the testers that are across the planet. Yeah. And there are ways to do this, by the way. There are ways. This is where Test First comes in and gets better. So there are ways, because Test First gives you the specifications that they can understand. So there are ways to work cross-country as needed, or cross-world as needed. Yeah. You could show the cost to management of what's going on, so they're informed. Remember, they don't think and talk about what they see either. They see what they think and talk about. So if you're not talking about this, because they're not devs, if you don't talk to them about this, don't expect them to understand your problems. It's obvious to you. It's not obvious to them. So you have a responsibility to change the system. And guess what? They have a responsibility to change the system. But be aware it's the system. It's not you personally, unless maybe you're not motivated and maybe you don't have the skills. Yeah, you have some of that, but that's not the main problem usually.
But each person, as they navigate the system, has a different worldview as they engage with the system and live in different segments of an organization that is siloed and functionally divided, that they are effectively speaking different languages.
You must have been sneaking in some of our sessions, because that was on Thursday morning. We talked about three things. One was what's a coach? And one of the others was that people create their own reality. See, we tend to think there's a world out there and that we see the world. And when we disagree with somebody, it's because we see the world and they don't. So they're wrong. But the reality is, well, I'm not going to get into the metaphysics. Is there a world out there or not a world out there? But the reality is our perception of the world is our perception. And their perception of the world is their perception. And they're often different. So there are two things here. This is why Lean suggests having explicit workflow, so we can at least get an agreement on how we're working together. It's not you follow it, it's what we're saying is best. And the other thing, verifiable first principles are kind of agreement. If we agree that delays are a bad thing, if we agree that they'll cause waste, and if we agree that we can verify them on our own, then we can have a conversation about our alternate worldviews and come up with an agreement. Okay, so there was another.
Yeah, the specific to this conversation we're having right now, Jim Benson, hi Jim,
Hey,
pops in
Jim.
here. Yeah.
By the way, Jim is, anybody who doesn't know who Jim Benson is, assuming this is the Jim, I can see the picture.
It is.
This
I see
the
his
guy.
picture.
Yes, this is the guy. He's an amazing individual, and I tend to think I do pretty well in how people think and interact, but I'm an amateur compared to him. So he's a great resource to use. And I've been back to the Seattle area. I've got to look you up again, Jim. We used to get together more often. But anyway, so I'm not talking about a worldview, for one thing. I'm not talking about politics. I'm not talking about how people should interact socially. And I'm not saying that's not important, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there are two main things you've got to create value on. I mean, alignment on. This is such a good question. One question is these first principles. If you can understand some of the mechanics of things, that's helpful. But what do you do with it? What's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Well, that's where you have to align on value. So what is the purpose of the organization? In fact, that's what we started with on Monday, was how do you understand what we call the strategic pillars of the organization, like what the company's up to, and then how do you use that to budget, and how do you use that to allocate your funds, and then how do you use that to combine the team? So you've got to both start at the top of the business needs and where the business is going, and then you've got to drive from the reality of what's going on. So those two have to blend together, and that's also part of the Amplio approach.
Yeah. And again, and I think the word alignment tends to get misused because it oftentimes comes down from the folks who understand everything at the top, said,
That's right.
we need all of you to align. And I think what you're talking about is definitely different. It's about understanding, agreeing on what the facts are, and coming
That's
to a
right.
shared understanding so that alignment happens as a result of these agreements and understanding.
That's right. So what happens then is it's let's say you have three teams. In fact, I have a case study. I have a case study on this. I don't where I went into a place a long time ago. I don't know, around 2008, 9, 10. I'm not sure about that time. And they were doing Scrum great. Jeff Sutherland had been there. The guy who was in charge of the development group eventually became a CST just a year or two later. But what they had was a lot of separate teams working on the same project, and they were trying to coordinate them, and they had a lot of troubles coordinating them. And I had seen from some other work, some of our other consultants at Net Objectives had done, that we used a shared backlog, and the shared backlog represented an alignment around the product we were building. And it immediately got the teams working together. It looked like now one team instead of separate teams. And there were still three small teams, but they were aligned together. And I've used this technique a lot. They're not just shared backlogs, there are other things that you can do with. So alignment is what you just said, Ryan. It's when people have the same vision, when they have the same values, when they have the same understanding of how to work. And basically, literally in a couple of days of consulting and getting them to see this using some principles of lean and value stream mapping so they could see the disalignment. But see, alignment's a lot easier than coordination. Coordination is a lot of work. So like I'm a cat person. I used to not be, but 37 years with my wife. I know 30. In fact, when my wife first came to live with me, she brought a couple of cats. I used to be allergic to cats. I'm not anymore. And that's a story in and of itself. But I love my wife so much. So this 37 years ago, I tell her, honey, I can't handle these cats. I'm allergic. And she just looked me straight in the eye. I had three little kids from an early marriage. She says, you come with kids, I come with cats. That pretty much tells the whole story. She's direct, I love it.
That's not the high touch part of her. That was the different part.
Yeah, well, she's got a spine.
When it comes to cats,
like this. That's why we're still together. But anyway, anyway, this is alignment. If you don't agree how things work, and you don't agree what the value is, how the hell are you going to get agreeing? Now, the reason I brought up cats is it's very easy to herd cats. I don't know why people talk about this is so difficult. You get this thing that most people consider to be a PowerPoint controller. It's really a laser pointer. It's a chase, the cats chase it, the little red dot.
Yeah.
I've had anyway. So there's one last thing, and if there are other questions, one last thing I want to show. I think I.
Do you want to bring the screen up again?
Yeah,
we have two questions
I
didn't hit that I said we'd have in our Ask Al segment. Whenever we've come to that point, I would bring back in.
Okay, so pull the screen up. I showed this already. That if you go to from successengineering.works, if you go to the resources and then take YouTube, this one right here is the interesting one. I'm starting to put. I just created this new one. These are elsewhere on the thing, but the really interesting ones, like how you can use patterns to create a big picture while people can work on their own, or how you base you're on, which these are the slides. So you can even see it right there, this spirals. And then this hybrid one. And I want to talk about this hybrid one because this has turned into something also very interesting. Okay, so, and I'm not going to go through this, but I got that reminder with, just close that. Okay, here. So somebody was talking about Scrumban. I'm just going to mention this real quickly. This is also I have a whole talk on this. We did this. I don't know when we did it, but it's up there. And the thing I like the idea of hybrids, but what tends to be ignored is that if you take a Scrum and you take a Kanban and you put them together, see, the way Scrum builds from flow, lean, theory of constraints is tacit. It's really not explained. In fact, it's even denied. Back in 2008 I think it was 2008, I was saying that you would do Scrum better if you thought of it as a partial implementation of if you thought of it as a partial implementation of lean. I didn't know flow theory of constraints so much. And Ken said I was trying to sell lean and threw me off the Scrum development group, Yahoo at that time group. But the problem is Scrum does it tacitly and it doesn't completely follow flow, lean, theory, constraints. Now, Kanban has a better connection, but not fully, or at least some of the Kanbans. Carl Scotland, I would imagine Jim, Kanban, you can incorporate all of lean in Kanban or some of lean. And the way they did it anyway, when I was part of Lean Kanban University that I co-formed with David Anderson, I'm not affiliated with that now, only some of lean was in that. I brought the lean when I left, the lean went away. So the thing is, you've got these problems that Scrum can solve, different problems Kanban can solve, and different degrees of connection. The problem is the mindset connection is different. So it's not really that that you've blended things, you just have a collection of practices. But if you come from first principles, factors for effective value, we have another video on that, but that's basically how do you use first principles to make decisions. But now there was a slide I wanted to show. So this person I saw this thing, forget where it is. Nope. Sorry, I know it's here. There it is. Okay, so forget how Amplio does it for now. It's not my point. My point is you have these two approaches based on different models. So you have a collection of practices, which is fine, but how do you tie them together? When you come fully from this, see, I love Scrumban, by the way. And I think Jim and Corey Lattice are still partners in their modus operandi. Corey is also amazing. Corey wrote the first book, actually, on Kanban in a book called Scrumban. Scrumban is not a hybrid of Scrum and Kanban. Scrumban is a way to go from Scrum to Kanban. And Obaya, thank you. And yeah, and the two of them are amazing. Just totally amazing. So the point is, Scrumban is based on Kanban's foundation, whatever you might think of that as being, and it was dated, I mean, it's ways back. It's not Scrum's foundation. Now, this is important because this is different. You have a different set of constraints. And actually, Corey summed it up once great. And I think you probably remember this, Jim. We were at some coffee shop. We were at the bar. And I remember all three of us were at the bar and we were talking about Scrum and Kanban. And Corey is usually, at least around me, he's been mild mannered. And he pounds his fist on the bar. He says, there is no Scrum, there is no Kanban, there's only Lean. I still remember that. It was so funny coming from him, especially.
Well, or if you got Cope in the James Copeland, it would probably be there's only TPS.
Yeah.
That also may be part of it.
Now, Jim has probably seen that side of Corey before, but I'd never seen it. I thought it was hysterical, and I agreed with him. But the point is, hybrids, as they're done today, are just collection of practices when you really need to get to what's the underlying mindset. And that has to include the people. How people react is very critical. So I'm going to show this one more time, because what I want you to do is look at this thing. Except one more time, that's the wrong one.
The spiral.
Yeah, I want you to look at the spiral a different way than what you probably were looking. I don't know how you were looking at it, but I suspect you might have been looking at it a different way. Forget effective or ineffective. You know, going down here, forget that. Look at it from how do people react to not understanding why. Ask yourself, how do people react to being told, to follow, to understand, in order to understand? How do people react to saying, well, we're not giving you everything, you have to figure it out? How do people react to needing more training and needing more coaching as a result of this? And how do people react to, well, you can't do that and still be doing Scrum, and that's what your boss told you to do, and that's what you've been trained in? Whereas, how do people react to, you can understand up front, because we teach this as part of the system. Mm-hmm. How do we take advantage of latent knowledge, meaning you kind of know it, but you didn't kind of know you know it? See, it's funny. Mm-hmm. People talk about there's what you know, there's what you don't know, and there's what you don't know you don't know. Yeah. But there's what you do know, and you don't know you know it.
Yeah, the latent knowledge, right?
The latent knowledge. And when you have a eureka moment, oh yeah, I understand. That's what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So what happens when that happens? What happens when you could start quickly without resistance? What happens when you have a way to select the right solution for your situation? That's where patterns. See, emotionally, this is pretty much ignoring the humanity of how we learn. And this is paying attention to it. See, that's actually even more important, I would suggest, than the practices you start with. Although it's good to get good practices to start with, because here you get excited. And here on the right side, you get excited. And moving from the left to the right doesn't take everybody. It just takes a guide, because a good guide can do this. And the way you become a guide is not taking a 2-day course. This takes a while. That's why the ACE program is more of a mentoring program. I've been realizing that this morning. I was thinking, you know, I've been calling it a learning journey and all that, but in a real sense, it's a mentoring program that costs like an online training program. So it's inexpensive, but it's powerful that way. Okay. So I've covered everything I wanted to cover. Like I say, this was a big week. Now, we're not having a session. If you're interested, I've said this several times. You don't need my screen. If you're interested in learning more, go to successengineering.works. AC, that typing in will take you to the ACE learning journey. But you can also, if you type ACOP, they'll take you to the same place. If you do ACOP, Amplio, just instead of Amplio Consultant Educators, put ACOP for Amplio Community of Practice. That's free. You can attend these sessions I've been talking about right there. You can attend these sessions I've been talking about free, and live. And otherwise, you can get the recordings. If you take the resources and look at the YouTube, I've got a whole bunch. I organize the ACOP sessions about foundations in a foundations playlist. I put specialized one, and the first one on the upper left is Amplio Advantage, where there's some things we really do kind of, I won't say differently everywhere. There's a lot of overlap between people like me, Obaya, that's Jim Benson and Corey Lattice, Steve Pereira with his new book he came out, and Flow, Peter Merrill, and Wolfram Mueller, and Steve Tendon with his same Flow. Those three have their own way of doing it. I've kind of organized a lot of good stuff in my fashion, but it morphs as I learn. There's no right way to move forward, but however you move forward, you better be paying attention to people and how they learn and how they change and how they resist. And you better be paying attention to the reality of what knowledge work is. And if you're not paying attention to that, it's going to fail. So what I do know about my experience with Jim is he's a lot different than me. And that's not good or bad. He's just different.
Jim, I think you're a bass player too, if I recall correctly. So
I play the piano, but we're not going to do it. I'm not very good at doing it. Although maybe we could.
Yeah.
I'm in Edmonds. You're in Seattle still, I think. The point is, you got to find somebody who takes all of this stuff and then moves forward in a way you like. So there's not a right way. I'm not saying Amplio is the way. I've never said that. But if you don't pay attention to these pieces, I know you're not going to do as well as if you were paying attention to them.
This talks sounds like, something that was happening in the late 90s about folks who were maybe experimenting with different lightweight frameworks of software development that, now they're folks, again, you're talking about yourself and Jim and Steve and Wolfram and all those folks. I wonder, maybe we could go to Utah and have a conference and then come out with some values and principles that might, spur revolution, to who knows.
I don't, I was at the second one of those. So I was not at the first one, but I was at the 10-year anniversary. I suspect I was brought back in or invited because Dave Anderson, like I said, had created Kanban University, Lean Kanban University. So I was kind of a thought leader in that area, and others. But there was such a diversity and fracture to the space. The problem is there's a lot of diversity out there, which is good when it comes to teams and things like that. But there's just a lot of nonsense, in my opinion, and dogma. And I don't see trying to do that. However, it has crossed my mind more than once. And maybe we should try to start doing that here every few weeks, is to have some people like the ones we just mentioned and have them on and not discuss my way versus their way or something like that, but just discuss the reality of things, because
what's happening and what are the commonalities of the ways of doing,
because there are a lot of them. And some places there's less commonality than others. I'd say of the people I really admire and like, Jim and Corey are probably a lot different at Obaya than I am, but I love their work. They just look, nobody is good at everything. I'm not good at everything. I'm really good at some things, and I'm not so good at everything. And so you have some of this diversity with these different people we've mentioned, because some of them are better at some things than others. So Jim does some stuff that to me is like, oh my God, I could never do that. But I think I see the value. He pulls that off. That's great. But he's also being intelligent about it, using a solid base.
Yeah. So we do have a question here. We have two questions that came through.
Sure, let's get it. I can go a couple of minutes over. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, that's the one we had before.
I'm sorry. Oh, there's a different one. And I think Timothy had another one in there. Or maybe not. Maybe I did get that one in there.
By the way, the other aspect of the Amplio community of practice, which is free, you get to ask questions. I usually have a presentation, but you also get to ask questions there as well. Oh, good.
That sounds like a question I'm gonna take in Beta Codex Live next week about about compliance and imposition and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that fits. Now here's the I'm going to throw some interesting thing in here, and I really wonder. I need to maybe, the more I think about this, I think I need to put. I have a page on case studies, and I'm thinking that what I will do is I will do this because this is important. Under the resources, it's not there today. Now it'll be there in a few hours, probably the end of today. I'm going to add a link to the case studies, because what's interesting about the case studies that I wrote is, and here I can, if I give you the link, if that's not what I want, if I give you the link, Ryan, you could put it in the chat.
Yep, absolutely. Put in private there,
because there's something very interesting about this, that what you just put up there, that question. Made me think is that I have done some things that at first might look like walked on water, couldn't possibly be that good. Here, I'm going to chat with mine. There we go. That's the link. You can send it on. But let me tell you the results I got. Now, I don't do this all the time. I wish. But the fact that I've done it a half a dozen times, and I wrote up 4 case studies where the returns, and this is on there, the returns. I'm not trying to do this to brag. I'm trying to point out something. For a $20,000 investment, they save $1.73 million over the next year or more. For a $10,000 investment, they save 25% of the time of a 175-person development group. For $20,000, they save 20% of the cost of a 100-person web development group. And for $6,000, they didn't have a metric, but basically this was 300 people in development, totally confused. And now they had clarity on what was going on. Now, how did they do this? Actually, that's interesting. That would be using all the stuff I've talked about, but that's not the most interesting thing. Who led each one of these was management. Every one of these was led by management. And in fact, in some cases, team leads weren't even present. Some cases they were. But it's because in every one of these cases, they were violating these first principles. And I saw they were violating these first principles. And I didn't tell them, you're violating first principles. You got to do this. I actually used value stream management in almost all the case. Showed them so they could see it. See, we don't think and talk about what we see. We see what we're able to think and talk about. So I started talking about it. I started showing it to them. They said, oh, this is insane. See, when you can look at it the correct way, you see some of the insanity of how you're doing. It's like Akoff talks, you can't get a solution if you're solving the wrong problem. They were trying to coordinate better instead of align automatically.
Yeah, or agree or see what's there. And I think you're building that bridge between your knowledge and their knowledge and developing skill.
The point is,
it's all about learning, it seems. Yeah.
Management are the best people primed to make the system changes you have to make. And when you take them as a negative, oh, they're not educated, they're not this, they're not that, they're against us, they're chickens. It doesn't work so well.
Talk about the othering part of it, and I think that there's another idea. Again, if you take that the next step, again, what we talk about in the Beta Codex and decentralization, the manager's jobs, the multi is to work on the system, not to run the business every day.
That's right.
Because the people running the business know a lot more.
Absolutely. Managers. Sorry. Yeah, managers all have shifted. What I'm saying is they're no longer managing the people, they're managing the business, they're managing the system. And the people have to talk to them and they have to respect that. But if you just expect them to know it, they don't. So Ryan, you mentioned Beta Codex a couple of times and you mentioned you have a seminar on it. Why don't you plug it? Give the time and date.
I don't have a time and date yet. I'm determining the time and date. I'll likely be in the last week of August.
Okay.
I'm hoping I'm going to do a 2-hour session. I want to do a 2-hour intro session. Again, what are the principles of the Beta Codex? What are because it's a flip. It's flipping from hierarchy to
brilliant work. Kind of stuff. I'm not an expert in it, but I've read some of Neil's stuff. It's brilliant. Organizing for Complexity, one of my favorite books. So if you don't follow Ryan on LinkedIn, follow him so you can get the announcement when he does it, because that's good stuff. Yeah. And I guess probably we're past time, but
well, we're past. If you got to go, we got to shut it down because that's. Well,
if there's another question out there, I'll answer questions. But otherwise, I got nothing else I want to add. So ask a question quick. I got another 5 minutes.
There was one request that may be
sure. Yeah, request.
It was to rewrite the Agile Manifesto. I think that's been asked a few times.
Okay, there's a reason I don't. So let me be clear about this.
Yeah.
So the Agile Manifesto, I remember before it came out, from like 99. I was into XP. I got into 99. I got into Scrum the next year. Before the manifesto came out, it was like we didn't have a name for what we were doing. I was calling it iterative, incremental, integrated. Because I don't know, I'm not good with names. And then when Agile came, I said, oh, what a fabulous name. But the manifesto was great because it created a label for what we were doing, and it created a vision for what we were doing. What that book is?
Well, this book, from what I understand, I don't know if a couple of the signatories were reading this book around that time.
Okay.
So
But there were 2 or 3 serious problems with the manifesto. In fact, I never signed it because I noticed right away that it had a serious problem. And the first one I didn't know was a problem, which was we're discovering better ways. But what's interesting is people are still holding on to it as it's right. If it's about discovering better ways, then why are we still using it 23 years later? And, we talk about dog years, what the equivalent is. Well, agile years, internet years is a factor of 10 years is like 100. But the real reason was the first value. And I understood why they said it, but I knew it would be a problem. It was, while we appreciate things on the left more than the right, is people, process. See, that puts the two opposed to each other. Now, I knew why that was there.
Well, it's not either or. I think that's the thing.
And I know they say it's not either or, but it's not either or. But it's something else too. It still has them opposed to each other. And it's not either or, but there's a conflict there. Now, I know why they did it, and it actually had value. And I'm not saying if I was there, it would have been better, because it wouldn't have been better. I don't think I had the skills then to make the Agile Manifesto better, but I did. It's easier to see flaws in it to make things better. But I knew what was missing was systems thinking. See, the reason it was there is at the time, I just come off projects where we use P+, and this is a process, you got to follow it. Yes, there's value to that kind of thing. There's value to the process, but it's more important to have people do it. And there is an opposition to that type of process. But if you think about not the word process, but the system you're in, how you're working, the workflow, the explicit way you're getting work done, the two go together. So I said it should have been people and the process, using process as not something imposed, but process as the system and how you're working. And then Don Reinertson noticed one of my heroes. If you've not read Principles of Product Development Flow, second generation lean product development, read it. And the way to read it is read the beginning few pages of each section. That'll give you the overview. And it's only about, 40 pages, thick book, but that'll give you the overview. And then you can go back and read the principles as you need them. Anyway, Don said, it's people times process. The two are positive. They work together. They synergize. And when you put them as something to follow, then process isn't so great and it's people over process. But when you put them together and you recognize the system can make things better, it gets very dynamic. And that's kind of what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get to another manifesto because it's going to change.
Yeah.
And I don't want something out there that we're holding on to. I'm sorry.
Uncovering better ways is pretty strong.
I love that part of it. I love that part. That's my manifesto. We are discovering better ways, and we attend to human nature in the process. That would be my manifesto.
Well, and then it's a decentralized, democratized manifesto. So,
but the other thing is use the first principles, and I'll set up where you can get to these this case study and the other document I posted real easily from the resources. I'll set up a page for general resources. So anyway, I love talking with you, Ryan. I'm not quite sure what we'll do next week. I kind of know, but I'll let you know. We have these every Friday at this time, and come prepared with questions. I love questions.
Questions are great, I think, and we have a few guests we've been talking about a few times. Jim, again, we kind of gave Jim preferential treatment because I know him real well. I know him a little bit, but I think having discussions like this that kind of
I love it.
What's happening now? Maybe we have a bit more of that. So, and for those of you who are watching this, whenever it is for you, suggest questions on our LinkedIn. If there are people you want us to bring into this conversation, I'm open to it. No, Al's open to it.
Yeah, totally.
We're happy to be a source of knowledge for you. So, and
tag me with the questions if you ask on it to make sure I see it, because I don't always monitor it, but I follow the tags.
Great.
Okay.
All right, Al. Great time, and see you same bat time, same bat place next week.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.